Okay, so before we jump straight in and start making this Lottie animation, it really helps to have a bit of context around how Lottie animation came about and why you would use it. So before Lottie animations, you essentially had two options for using animation, and that was to use either an MP4 or a GIF. Now, I exported an MP4 and a GIF of this animation we're going to be making, and just so you can see the difference, you got your MP4 here that's about 270 kilobytes, and you can see the quality is also pretty poor because it's a raster graphic. Same with GIF. You've got a 243 kilobyte file that has really poor resolution. Whereas with the JSON file, it's 6 kilobytes. And because it's a vector graphic, you can scale this up or down, and it's just going to be perfect quality. Now, a bit of context on how Lottie animation came about. So you're going to be seeing three key players as you kind of start to learn a bit more about Lottie animation. Okay, so the first one is Lottie Files, and they're a company that essentially are building and maintaining tools for Lottie animations. And the other two are Airbnb and a guy called Hernan Teresi. So Hernan, you could essentially call the inventor of Lottie animations, I guess. So he created this plugin for After Effects called Body Movement, which essentially let you export your After Effects animations as a .json file, which could be used in code. And then Airbnb got in contact with him, and essentially they built on the top of his work to make sure that this Lottie animations can be supported by a bunch of different platforms. So whether it be iOS, Android, web, etc. So as I mentioned, the last one is Lottie Files, and they're the one that you're probably mostly going to be dealing with, but it helps to have an understanding of why Airbnb and Hernan and Body Movement keep popping up and what they are. Okay, so now you've got a bit of context around what Lottie animations are and why you're going to be using them. Let's go ahead and create our first one. Okay, so what we're going to create today is this heart animation, like what you see on Instagram when you like or unlike a post, and I'm going to be showing you how to make this from start to finish. Okay, so let's go ahead and start preparing our files. So this is the only resource you're going to need if you want to follow along this tutorial, so I'll leave a link in the description. Okay, so when preparing our files in Illustrator, there's one thing that we need to make sure to do properly. And that is up in the top right, you can see that our layers are actually nested in this top group, so layer 1. And what we need to do is split those out so that we can animate each individual layer. Otherwise, we're only going to be able to animate this top group. So to do that, we're just going to click on that group, hit the little menu here and go Release to Layers Sequence. Now we can grab those two layers, pull them out of that group, and delete that empty group. Now it's helpful here just to name your layers. So I'm just going to name these filled and empty. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and save that as an Illustrator file. We're going to jump over to After Effects, grab our Illustrator file and just drag it right over here into the resources panel. Now when we're importing it, we want to make sure that we import it as a composition and the layers as layer size. Now because this is a vector graphic, it really only matters that your aspect ratio is correct, so it can be any size you want. It is helpful to make it at the size you're going to end up using it. But like I said, as long as the aspect ratio is fine, you're going to be okay. So now we've got our files in After Effects. We're going to go ahead and find the composition, which has this little icon here, and double click on that so it opens up. Here we can see we've got both of our layers. Now we need to do one more thing here, which is select both of them, right click, and create shapes from vector layers. Now, after we've done this, we can go ahead and delete those Illustrator files. Now these shape layers are what we're going to be animating. Okay, now because we dragged our composition directly into After Effects, it's gone ahead and put a default background of black. Now this won't export with our settings, but just while we're working on it, it's going to be a lot easier to have that on white. So to change this, I'm going to go into composition settings, find background color, and just change that to white. Okay, so as you can see, it hasn't pulled through my layer naming here correctly, so I'm just going to go ahead and rename those to filled and empty. Okay, so before we start animating, I want to jump back onto the Airbnb docs for Lottie animations, and I'm going to go to the supported After Effects features. Now, this can look a little bit confusing. Don't freak out too much. Essentially, all we're going to be looking at for this is the transformation properties. So here you can see we've got position, scale, rotation, opacity. These are the main ones that we're going to be using in this animation, and they're supported across the board. So to find these in After Effects, you can just toggle down your layer and then toggle down to transformation. Here we have the position, scale, rotation, opacity. As you can see, anchor point was one of the supported features as well. We're not going to be using that in this, but that's how you find them manually. Now, I do use the keyboard shortcuts for this, and that is T for opacity, P for position, R for rotation, and S for scale. Okay, so for this animation, it's really simple. We're just going to be using scale and opacity. So I'm going to grab these two layers, hit S to get the scale property up. I'm going to hit this little stopwatch, which is going to add a keyframe for that. And then I'm going to deselect, grab both those layers again, hit T for opacity, and I'm going to hit the stopwatch again. So it's going to add more keyframes. If I deselect that and press U, it's going to show me all of my keyframes. Okay, now that we've got that highlighted, it's going to be super simple to just race through and create this animation. So if you follow along, I'm going to jump ahead to 10 frames. I'm going to add in a keyframe here because we're not changing any scale properties, but we're going to. And then I'm going to jump ahead 4 more frames. And here I'm going to change that scale property down to 80. I'm going to hit enter. And same for the empty layer, 80 and enter. And then I'm going to jump ahead 5 frames and put that at 120. Same for both. And then if I jump ahead another 4 frames, I'm going to go back to 100%. Okay, so there we've gone and animated our scale, super straightforward. All we're going to do now is add some opacity to that so that the front fades out and the background comes in. We want that to happen pretty instantly. So I'm going to go ahead and set the opacity here to 0. Okay, and because I set another keyframe at the start of this, I'm going to actually go ahead, click on that and delete it so that the opacity is 0 from the beginning. And then 1 keyframe after that opacity, I'm going to put 100. So there's an instant switch. And I'm also going to set that empty layer just so it turns off after a keyframe. So I'm going to set that opacity from 100 to 0. And then if I zoom out a little bit and play this, you can see we've got a rough animation. Now the last thing we're going to do here to make this really smooth is we're going to grab all of these scale keyframes by holding shift and selecting. We're going to right click, go to keyframe assist and easy ease. So this is going to make that animation a little bit smoother. Beautiful. Okay, now we want to animate back to the starting position. So at the moment, if I reduce this time frame and just play that over again, you can see that we animate from an empty state to a filled state, but we want to do the reverse and animate from that filled state back to the empty state. So really simple, all we're going to do there is copy these keyframes, move the playhead up a little bit, paste, same for the empty state, copy and paste. And all we're going to do here is switch around the opacities. So if you can see, the opacity layer is going from filled to empty. We need to just get that keyframe selected and set it from 0 to 100. And then go to the next keyframe over and instead of 100, set it to 0. And vice versa for the empty state. So from 100 to 0 and from 0 to 100. Now let's play that one. Perfect. Okay, so now we have our animation created. Let's go ahead and export it using the Lottie Files plugin. So to do that, we'll go up to Windows, Extensions, Lottie Files. As I mentioned, you could use the Body Movement plugin, but I like the Lottie Files and you'll see why. So once you hit that plugin, it's going to pop up. And as you can see, our composition is appearing right here, our heart composition. And if we go ahead and hit this arrow, it's going to render that for us. And here we can see that playing. We could change the background color at this point if we wanted to. I'm going to leave it as none. And if we wanted to, we could also push this to our device. So if you have the app downloaded on your phone, you could push it to your phone and you'll get a notification to open that up and inspect it. Instead, we're going to go ahead and upload this to Lottie Files. So if I hit that upload button, you're going to see that it's going to start uploading and rendering. And then once that's complete, you can see this little globe icon. And if I click on that, it's going to open up my Lottie Files account. And here you can see we have our completed animation. Now, if I go to handover, I could download this as a JSON or a Lottie file. I can convert it to a GIF, or I can send this to my developers and they can implement it. As you can see, also there's a QR code here. If you want to scan that on your camera, then it'll open this up on any device that you have and you can preview it on your Android or iOS. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and name this like and unlike, and I'll publish this to the community. So you can use it for free if you want. It'll be on the Lottie Files community. Okay, so there we are, Lottie Animations. Really straightforward. If you've used After Effects before, it's going to be an absolute breeze, and it's super powerful to use in all of your projects. If you have any questions or requests for content around Lottie Animations, just drop it in the comments below.